Good.
All right, multiplication. The rules for multiplication and division are the same, remember. If you got a positive times a positive or divided by, you get a positive. Positive times or divided by negative is negative. Negative and positive makes a negative, but two negatives makes a positive. So, the easy thing to remember when you're multiplying or dividing is any two negatives will cancel. Don't get it confused with the add and subtract rules. So, in a problem, if it's got a bunch of negatives and they're all multiplied and divided or both, you can just start crossing off pairs. And if one negative is left, the answer is negative. So that's what this says here. A product is negative if it has an odd number. Because if it's got an odd, you cross off pairs and you're always going to be left with one. A product is positive if it has a even number of negatives. So, the difference in this from what you did in 8th grade is now we're going to have variables in it. X's and Y's and all that stuff. So like here they just got real numbers. 2 times 3 is 6. Here there's 3 numbers multiplied and 2 negatives, so they cancel. 7 times 7 is 49, times 2 is 98. The exponents, I think I showed you this before. The calculators are the exponents are the one thing that they'll do wrong. I don't know about your iPad ones, but I know the big ones do. There's a difference between negative 3 squared and negative 3 squared. I showed you guys this before, right? Yeah. Here, the squared is hooked to the parenthesis. So that means you take whatever's in the parenthesis times itself twice, and you get 9. This one, it's only hooked on the 3. So that means it's just the 3 that's being squared. So the negative would stay there, and then it's a 3 times 3 will give you negative 9. If you punch this in these calculators, negative 3 squared, it will give you positive 9. So you need to know that rule when you're doing it. That's the one thing on the calculator that in the order of operations it'll do wrong. Now, if the exponent is odd, it doesn't matter how you do it. Because if I had negative 4 cubed or negative 4 cubed, no matter what, it's going to come out negative. Because this means negative 4, negative 4, negative 4. 2 of them will cancel, you're left with 1. So it's negative 64. Here, it's just the 4 being cubed, so you just put 1 negative, and then you've got 4 times 4 times 4, which still gives you negative 64. So the only time you got to watch that is if it's an even exponent. Okay? So negative 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. And there's an odd amount of negatives, so that would be negative 8, right? Negative 1 squared, some people say 2, but what's negative 1 times negative 1?
Negative 1. Positive 1.
Positive 1. So negative 8 times 1 is negative 8. Here's one while I did it up there. Only the 3 is squared. So the negative stays there. 3 squared is 9. And then it's times negative 5. Negative times negative is positive 45. So this is one problem where you can't just plug it in the calculator and get the right answer. You need to know that exponent rule. If it's got letters in it, x times y is just xy. Negative times negative makes a positive. A times a is a squared. Negative times negative is positive.
Why is it a squared? Oh, never mind, got it.
And then here, 2 negatives cancel, there's 1 left, so the answer is just negative 9ab. So it's pretty easy. So some of it, it's just using real numbers. You can use a calculator. Just remember with the sign. Negative 1 to the fifth will give you negative 1. It's negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. There's 5 of them, so whenever it's odd, it's negative. Times negative 3 is positive 3. 2 negatives multiplied make a positive. Here, when there's more than one thing in it, remember, you can multiply in any order. So this is 6 times this times that. You could rearrange it 6 times negative 8 times t times negative t squared. Okay? You don't need to go through the work doing that. You can just look at it. 6 times a negative 8 is negative 48. T times t squared. Remember the exponent rules? T times t squared, if I wrote it out, t times t squared means there's 2 of them. T to the third. Remember the rule is you add the exponents. So, and then that's negative, so that's a negative t to the third, because only the t is being squared, not the negative. And then you're multiplying 2 negatives, so they would cancel. So it'd just be 48 t to the third. Properties of multiplication. We did the properties of addition. Properties of multiplication are the same, except with multiplying. Multiplication is commutative, which means you can switch the order. 3 times negative 2 is the same as negative 2 times 3. Multiplication is associative, which means the order stays the same. You switch the parentheses. So if you've got this, you keep the order, negative 6, 2, 3, it's just the parentheses move from the first 2 to the second 2. Identity property. Identity, remember, doesn't change what it is. 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. 3 times what is 3? 1. So anytime you take something times 1, it doesn't change. Remember what the additive identity was? 3 plus what is 3?
0.
0. Multiplicative is 1, additive is 0. And then opposites. This the way you get an opposite is you just take it times negative 1. Opposite of 4 is negative 4, right? The way you get that is you take 4 times negative 1. The opposite of negative 6 is 6. The way you get that is you take it times negative 1, because then the negatives cancel. Evaluating. All it is you're going to put the number in and then use your calculator to figure it out. So again, these exponents are the ones you need to know how to use. This says you take the x and you square it. So the x is a negative 3, which means you take that and square it. So what's negative 3 squared? Close. What?
Negative 6.
Negative 3 squared means negative 3 times negative 3. Positive 9. So those you might want to do in your head when they're small like that, or at least use a calculator and then figure out what the sign is. And then a negative 2 times 9 is negative 18. Now this one, there's already a negative here, and then you're putting a negative in for the x. So what's going to happen? To change to positive, because the negative stays there, and I'm putting this in like that. Any 2 negatives will cancel. So actually, you're squaring what's inside there, so it turns out to be a positive 3. Oops. So you square a positive 3 and you get 9. 4 times 9 is 36.